Casino employees, what is the worst you have ever seen someone handle a loss? I actually did work in a casino in Las Vegas a few years back, and VIP services. One of our high rollers who visited frequently had a very bad gambling problem that his wife was divorcing him over. He lost everything at the tables and couldn't even afford his plane ticket back home. He threatened to go to the roof of the hotel and end it all. The casino felt so sorry for him, we ended up buying the ticket back home for him. Never heard from him again after that. Story 2. Former table dealer here. I've had intoxicated guys tell me I'm the worst dealer ever, I suck, etc. I would just reply, have a nice day. The other people at the table were generally on my side. I've had higher rollers slam the table with their fist or not react at all to losing thousands. The worst and the saddest one that sticks in my mind is a guy who was around $2,000 down on blackjack. He was nice. He was tipping pretty well. I was rooting for him as I tended to do. I knocked his tens for good luck, then he lost a big one and just yelled, crap, so loud that the entire casino must have heard it. It was a kind of desperation in his voice and everything about him that told me he could not afford to lose as much as he just lost. He went to the ATM and I rotated to another table. It was crap like that, the goddamn smoke in my face, sleep deprivation from the late nights that led me to get out of there. A lot of other unpleasant moments too, but they all blur together. Money was nice, but it wasn't for me. Story 3. A gentleman at a poker table in the 5-seat whizzed on the dealer. I never caught the signal the dealer used, but it was effective as all the guys who normally collect boxes from the tables showed up out of nowhere and then removed him from the table like they were taking out the trash. Well, I guess they kind of were, right? The table broke up so they could clean, the dealer showered and put on a new uniform, and I saw her on the floor again a few hours later. I guess that's given a new meaning to splash in the pot, eh? Story 4. Not a casino employee, but just the other day, my father-in-law, security, watched an elderly lady lose everything at a poker table and then go around and steal a couple people's purses and wallets. When they confronted her and asked her for ID, she wouldn't give it to them because they weren't the police. When the police arrived, she still wouldn't give them her ID or even her name, saying they couldn't arrest her if they didn't know who she was. Needless to say, they arrested her anyway. The last thing the cop asked her was, are you at least going to cooperate and walk out with us to the car? Or are you going to do it the hard way? They had to carry her out and she was kicking the windows in the back of the car the entire time. Story 5. I sat next to a guy. He drove a Pepsi truck. He said his mom passed away and left him $30,000. He'd never seen this much money before, so he thought he could turn it into $100,000. We're at the blackjack table. He's getting hammered and crying inconsistently because of his mom talking about her passing away. The cocktail waitresses are teasing him the whole night and he tips them $25 every drink. In 2 hours, he loses everything. He has this look of nervousness on his face and said his wife is going to end him if she finds out about this because they have 4 kids and wanted to buy a house. He walked out. 10 minutes later, I went to my car and saw that he got a DUI. In 24 hours, his mom passed away. He gets a ton of money, loses it all, will probably get divorced, gets a DUI, and is sitting in the back of a cop car with teasing from the cocktail waitresses. Story 6. Dealer for 10 years, third day dealing, fresh out of dealer school, I'm dealing Pai Gao tiles, Asian domino game, try to get pairs and tiles to add up as close to 9 as possible. On a $25 minimum game, guy bets $25, $75 for a good 2 hours. He then slides his whole stack on one hand for $3K. Now for those who know the game, he gets Tin Dai Bo, I pull Ji Jun. And for those who do not know the game, it's like he got pocket kings and I got pocket aces, or he pulled a 20 in blackjack, and I just pulled 11 cards to make 21. The odds are astronomical. It's the only hand that beats him. He slams his fists on the table screaming in Chinese, chips fly everywhere, and begins to self-induce retch all over my game. Close the table and pit down for cleanup, third day dealing. Money/benefits are great though, highly recommend the industry, made $30, $40 an hour. Story 7. Not an employee but my mom's friend won a slot machine jackpot. Security had to swoop in and save her because she was a very casual gambler and would use like 5 coins and leave. But that night on one of her first coins, she won the jackpot. The people around her were gambling freaks and some of them had been working that machine for hours before and felt they should have been their win. So they tried to attack her for the money, but she did get it. This wouldn't have been a big win either because it was a small place, but still, scary stuff. Story 8. Not an employee, but my girlfriend and I were at a local casino for dinner on Saturday, so we decided to take a lap around the playing floor afterwards. We're walking by the blackjack tables and notice a small crowd around a guy who had a pile of chips in front of him. After it's clear he lost it all to the dealer, he starts screaming that he couldn't lose, ends up leaving in handcuffs. Story 9. I used to be a casino host on cruise ships, and I witnessed many people struggle with gambling. One woman in particular remains vivid in my memory. She was gambling a significant amount throughout the cruise. Towards the end of the journey, I found her at the slot machines, visibly distressed. When I asked what was wrong, she tearfully confessed that she couldn't afford to play anymore, as all her losses were on her credit card. She was talking, playing, and crying simultaneously. I banned her from the casino, but it was already too late for her finances. I also heard unsettling stories from colleagues who previously worked for an Asian cruise company. They mentioned that a lifeboat would sometimes be kept partially lowered because some guests, after losing all their money, would attempt to jump overboard. Story 10. One night I was dealing at the high-limit table when a man lost his last two $500 chips, totaling a $30,000 loss in about 20 minutes. I'd known this particular player for years, so his reaction, though dramatic, wasn't entirely unexpected. He calmly stood up and neatly tucked in his chair, then he squared himself in front of me from behind his chair and ripped off his expensive $400 Robert Graham shirt. Buttons went flying in 4 different directions as he let out a primal scream. The other 2 players at the table were so startled by his delayed outburst that they ducked for cover. I was left speechless, staring at him with my mouth agape. He stood there, breathing heavily and glaring at me. After a tense moment, he turned and walked out of the casino, presumably heading to his villa to break something else. It was an absolute meltdown. Story 11. I once heard a roulette dealer recount a memorable interaction. A woman approached the table, handing over a check to cash out, and declared, "All right, time for me to win my rent money for the month." The dealer, instead of cashing the check, handed it back to her and firmly said, "Ma'am, we are not accepting your money in this hotel. Take this check and go pay part of your rent with it and work to pay the rest. This is supposed to be a place of fun, not where you risk your life." Story 12. I wasn't working at the time, but rather playing poker when a guy went super tilt after a bad hand. Anyway, he dove onto the table and thrashed around, scattering the cards and throwing everyone's chip stacks all over the place before security wrestled him out. It took a good 30+ minutes to sort everything out. That's also the day we all came to respect just how powerful casino surveillance cameras are. They were able to locate and replace every single chip exactly to where it was before his tantrum. Story 13. Forget casinos, I worked at a hole-in-the-wall liquor store. Well, it was more like a scratch-off lottery store that sold liquor. I can't tell you how many times people would spend all their rent money, car payment, and grocery money on scratch-offs. They'd come back in with their kids crying, begging me for their money back after spending like $1K every day for a week. Lady, I just work here, sorry. Also, one guy bought a ticket when I was trying to close and said for the favor that he'd split it with me if he won. Scratches it off to find it's an $80,000 winner. Immediately tells me he was just kidding about splitting it with me. Turns out he read it wrong because he didn't scratch it off all the way. I like to think it was a winner and God changed his mind when the guy was a schmuck. Story 14. Friend used to work at a casino in Las Vegas. He said one day a woman came in and gambled away about $30,000, which was her family's life savings, all their money, and also her son's college fund. A few hours later, my friend goes on his break and stumbles into the lady and her son, around 17, 18, in the parking lot, and the kid is absolutely livid. He's screaming at her, calling her every name in the book, yelling that she ruined his life and he now can't go to college because of her. She's now doomed to him, etc. During all of this, his mother is bawling like a baby and pleading with him to stop yelling at her and saying that she's sorry. My friend had to call security when the kid started to harm her. When they arrived, though, they saw him drive out of the parking lot and nearly, possibly deliberately, run over his mother. Very disheartening, my friend said. Yikes, getting the bus dropped on you by your own mother like that is insane. Story 15. Table games dealer here. I work at a casino in New Zealand. Had a Thai woman a few months ago betting $300K a hand. She lost $12 million at my table in less than an hour. The casino then paid for her private charter jet to Melbourne and back $70,000 so she could get more money. Not exactly sure why she had to go all the way to Australia to get more money, but I was doing a 16-hour shift and she came back to my table after her trip and dropped another $15 million. I hadn't had anyone close to spending that much money ever. She would also do weird stuff at dealers for luck and requested only young white dealers. Almost all baccarat dealers at my casino are Asian, so I had to deal to her every night for 10 days. Story 16. Not a casino worker, but when I was at university, I used to deal poker at various reputable bars and establishments around my city and neighboring towns. One night, I was dealing at a bar in a town that was about an hour-and-a-half drive away from my home. I used to drive a very recognizable vehicle, and a lot of the regular players knew my vehicle because they would see me pull into the car park when I arrived to deal. At about 1 a.m., I had a regular player evicted because he was intoxicated and being cruel. After I packed up and went to my vehicle at about 3 a.m., I discovered that all of my tires had been slashed. My roadside assistance wouldn't help because I was too far away. I had to leave my vehicle and take two $150 taxi rides and spend $800 on new tires. As a student, that hurt a lot and precipitated me leaving the industry. Story 17. I've been working at a casino for almost 4 years now. I don't know how much these people lost, but knew the outcome. One guy jumped off the back of the parking structure and no one found him for days. I can only imagine that sight. The other was in the high limit room and this guy started firing at the ceiling. That was a terrible night. He didn't hurt anyone, but it turned into a stampede and a bunch of people were injured. Turns out that guy ended someone earlier in the day and he was just going crazy before he got caught. He passed away a few days later in prison. Casinos are just horrible places to work at, but they pay good if you're tipped. I really want out, but I need the money. Story 18. I didn't work there, but one time I had a work conference in Vegas, and since we had the nights off, it was a bit of a party. At one casino, I went up to the bar and was drinking cocktails while playing some video poker. A dude came up and sat down next to me, and he sat there with glassy eyes, kind of muttering to himself. I eventually look over and attempt to strike up a conversation with him. He turns to me and says, I need to find some way to tell my wife and 3 kids that we no longer own our house and we need to find a new place to live. I bought him a drink, wished him luck, and bailed out of there. Story 19. I work for a company with a casino app for phones and computers. You can't win money, and you don't have to spend money to play, but you can spend money to buy more chips. We regularly receive threats if you don't give them more free stuff, threats of violence, prayers for our painful demise, assurances that we deserve to pass away in fires, and promises that the FBI / the Attorney General / Donald Trump will be investigating our obviously corrupt bums any day now. That's on top of people condescending to us, telling us we're worthless or without morals, that they essentially pay us our wages and get to treat us however they want. There are shining gems of people, for sure. It's not uncommon to befriend several high rollers and establish a rapport with them, but there is also a cesspool of individuals. We regularly joke about how well issuing threats would go over in person in an actual casino. Story 20. Ideal American roulette. I had a player placing bets as the ball was spinning. I called last bets, allowed him to place one more bet, and then signaled no more bets. He continued to place a couple of bets, which I quickly bounced back to him as they were too late. One of those late bets ended up winning. He began yelling, claiming I took off a valid bet. My manager quickly stepped in as he saw everything and agreed the bet was invalid. The patron then threw down his remaining colored chips worth about $30 and just gave them to the lady next to him and stormed off. Story 21. I had a black lady flag me down. I was a slot attendant and told me she needed the regulators to check her machine. Eventually, I pulled out the reason for her request. The slot machine was racist. Apparently, she had spent a couple of thousand on this single slot, a slot with a top jackpot of over just $1,500, and had it won. During her tenure as chief idiot, she claims 2 white girls came and played and they each won a jackpot. Many craps were had when my manager told me to turn the machine off to be tested later. Story 22. Not a loss, so to speak, but I worked at a casino for a little while and became quite familiar with the regulars, as you do. One lady used to come in quite often and play the machines, but a friend of mine actually knew her outside of work. The customer's husband and my friend's husband apparently knew each other from the friend's husband's line of business, a pawn shop. Customers would come in and gamble all of their money away, and the husband would go to the pawn shop to try and make some more money to repeat the cycle. Money they really didn't have and should have been using to take care of their child. It was those kinds of moments that made me never look back at working at a casino. Some people don't mind it, but not being able to help people who are already helpless can really suck. Story 23. I'm a current table games dealer specializing in 3 games, blackjack, roulette, and the crown jewel, craps. I have a bit of a twist on my answer. The first thing that came to mind wasn't a loss, but a big win. A guy approached my blackjack table and mentioned his family, wife, kids was at the bowling alley. Okay, whatever. He bought in for $200, which isn't much, but fine. It was just him and me at the table, and he proceeded to have one of the most amazing blackjack shoes I've personally ever dealt. By the end of it, he turned his measly $200 into about $10,000. And if memory serves me right, he only lost about 3 hands the entire shoe. Granted, this was only a $200 max table, so a very low limit. The guy was losing his mind over how well he was doing. During this whole time, he was drinking like crazy. Our cocktail waitresses don't come around that much, but when you tip them $15 on a $4 beer, they'll be around a lot. By the halfway mark of the 3rd shoe, he was pretty hammered. Keep in mind, I deal pretty fast, an entire shoe in less than 10 minutes. At this point, he was falling out of his chair and screaming at me, "If I win this hand, I'll crap my pants." I told him, "I hope you win, but please don't crap your pants. I don't want to have to go on a break and make fun of you." Up until this point, we had been getting along great, giving each other a hard time and whatnot, the way I like it. The most fun I can have at a table is when I can be a semi-schmuck and the table enjoys it. He then lost his temper and started yelling, calling me mean words. At this point, I turned to my pit boss, gave him a slight nod and a look. They know what that means. In a few minutes, security guards were there, escorting him off his feet and to the door. Story 24. Not an employee, sorry in advance, but I used to have a friend who took advantage of me financially. Over the course of 3 years, she managed to borrow about $4,000, which I never saw again. She was such a sweet talker that I was always convinced, but really, I was just stupid. Anyway, surprise, surprise, she was a compulsive gambler. 2 out of the 3 times she wanted to hang out, it was at the casino. But I went along because, well, I was getting a little hooked myself. One day, we were sitting together at a slot machine, taking turns. We weren't a couple. She was 50-something and I was 30. And somehow we hit $600. I know that's small potatoes, but to us, that was 2 weeks' pay. I immediately suggested we take it and run and was astounded that she actually agreed for a change. Well, as the machine was spitting out tokens, it ran out about halfway through, so we had to wait for an attendant. We had about half of the tokens, $300, sitting in a cup, and she asked if she could go off and play with it while I waited for the attendant. I figured, what's the worst that could happen? 5 minutes later, the attendant arrived and I got the other $300. Another 5 minutes after that, she showed up empty-handed, asking if I'd split my half. In the closest thing I'd probably ever had to an argument in my life, I told her I was going home and she had to come with me because I was her ride. She didn't have her own car, but she wouldn't leave. She kept begging me for just one more $20 and insisting she could make it back, like she was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that she could. I just said, no, you can't. She even tried getting up really close to my ear while we were sitting down and trying to talk all intimately to me. It took almost every ounce of resolve I had not to react. Anyway, sorry about the long post. I drove home without her because I had to go to work that night. The next morning when I got off, she was still there at the casino. I was so certain there were going to be 10 voicemails from her begging for me to come pick her up, but she ended up getting her sister to come get her. I did give her the $20 just to shut her up before I had left the day before, but I doubt it lasted her all of the 16 plus hours that she was there. Story 25. In the early 2000s, I was called to respond to an unattended vehicle in the parking garage. When I got there, the driver's side door was open, the radio was blaring, and there was a crap ton of cash sitting on the passenger seat. I called for backup to secure the funds, and as I waited, I smoked a cigarette, leaning against the wall, looking over to the side of the garage. That's when I saw our missing owner, mangled in the city tree below me. It came out that he was a school teacher that was about to be found out that he was having intimacy with students. Yikes, but if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 26. I spent 5 years working at a casino in Queensland, and one patron in particular comes to mind. He was an elderly Austrian man who played regularly, at least 5 times a week. One day, he'd been playing a dollar slot machine, $1 per line, 25 lines, so a $25 a spin, for about 3 hours and was already about $6,000 deep into the machine. He got up to grab a beer or something, and while he was gone, a young guy sat down, put in a $20 bill, and immediately hit the feature, landing a major jackpot. On that machine, he was looking at a $235,000 win from just $20. The Austrian man walked back just as the feature popped up and completely lost it. He started screaming that it was his machine and that it owed him $6,000. He carried on like a toddler who'd had his toy taken away. Security was called, but he continued his tantrum. They explained to him that due to the sheer number of machines available on the property, he had no claim to the money. They also informed him that while he had been playing it earlier, their machines don't have a reserve function. If you walk away, you're no longer playing. He threw an even bigger fit and demanded that the general manager come talk to him. Security doubled down, telling him to calm down or get out. He then told the security guard to screw off and pushed him. He was promptly restrained by 3 guards and escorted off the property, receiving a 24-hour ban to boot. True to form, the man was back precisely 24 hours later and continued playing like nothing had happened. Story 27. Ran a poker room in a major Las Vegas casino for 10 years. I tried very hard to keep people from chasing lost money. Told probably 1,000 people, we'll still be here tomorrow, so go home and get some sleep. Told many more that paying your bills and groceries comes first. Paid for quite a few cab rides with my own money. Long story short, don't believe the hype. There are just as many of us working to keep people grounded as not. You may say I am one of a few, but I'm not. I've known many people like me, and though I moved back home to Hawaii, I know there are still many people who help people find their balance in bad times. After all, it is both bad for your soul and for business to break another. That is never the intent. Story 28. I work in a keno department. I've worked in the pit for a few years and most of the food and beverage jobs too. We had a lady come in that had a foolproof method. She would bet $1 on one number. If she lost, she'd bet $2, then $4, then $8, then $16, then $32, and so on until her number came in, and then she'd start over with another $1 bid on a new number. It got so bad, and our machines were really due for an upgrade at the time, that she was up to $12,000 on one number. but our machines wouldn't accept the bet and we had to give her two separate $6,000 tickets. After a few hours, I accidentally heard her talking with another customer. She said she spent all of her money and had drained the joint account she shared with her husband. She started crying and said she was going to have to call him and she didn't want to. But now she was broke from out of state and she didn't have the foresight to book a hotel room first. She needed him to fly here so she could get more money. I just shook my head and started the next game. If you're just looking to throw away your money, we'll gladly take it from you and put it in the tip jar. It'd be less painful for everyone. Story 29. Obligatory, not an employee, but two instances involving my father at a casino come to mind. First, I once saw him pick up a chair and throw it into a slot machine after losing $5,000 on a $5 slot. He busted the glass in the machine. He left right after but was confronted at a later time. The casino told him the only reason they didn't ban him was because he spent so much money there. Another time, I was riding with him when he left the casino. He topped a hill at the end of the casino road at about 60, 70 miles per hour, and the car became airborne. He then sailed right through a stop sign at the bottom of the hill. Sometimes there's traffic backed up at that stop sign and you can't see it until you crest the incline, so we were extremely lucky there was no one that night. Story 30. I remember a few stories from my friend who used to work tables at a casino. She told me this one time a university student came in one day and lost all of his tuition money. He asked for it back, the casino said no. He then got his parents involved, his parents asked for the money back, and the casino said no. Another story I remember her telling me is about people who believe they're on a hot streak just reliving themselves right there on the slot machines. Another one is that there are a lot of different walking canes in the lost and found. Story 31. Not an employee, but I was gambling at a roulette table and this guy at the table was super intense the whole time. After about an hour, half an hour, he had lost the last half of his chips and subsequently flipped his crap and began screaming at the roller. And at the rest of us sitting there, immediately the pit boss came up to 86 him with two security guards standing behind him. He did not realize they were there. He began yelling at the pit boss and decided to push him, which quickly led to the guard slamming him onto the table and forcibly removing him from the premises. I cashed out and went to a different table since the luck seemed to have left that one. Story 32. I'm probably way too late for this, but I do work at a casino where we have a poker section. One day I was dealing Texas Hold'em and there was a hand that had quite the action before flop. The player under the gun, player A, raised the blind and a player, player B, in the middle position called. A player late in position C proceeded to 3-bet leading to player A re-raising again. This placed player B in a difficult position and he spent quite some time while thinking whether he should call, raise, or fold. After a couple of minutes, he decided to fold his hand and player C called. The flop came QQ7 and when player B saw it, he banged his hand on the table and sighed in disbelief. This was a very unethical move from the player's side since it gave a huge call tell for the both players involved, and I'd say it's probably the worst way I've seen somebody handle a loss. Story 33. Poker table, Texas Hold'em, an old man ended up getting thrown out over $3. Two old guys checked down a hand to the end. There was a whopping $3 in the pot. Old guy number 1 says he missed and shows an ace. Guy number 2 says that's enough to win. Guy number 1 then doesn't show his other card and tosses them away. But guy number 2 still had his cards. Dealer correctly declares the hand gone because he didn't show both cards and says by rule he has to give the pot to guy number 2. Guy number 1 loses his mind and starts screaming and yelling. Eventually, the floor supervisor is called over and backs up the play. Guy number 2 actually gives the $3 to guy number 1 since he wasn't trying to trick him or angle shoot. Guy number 1 takes the three $1 chips, spins around, and throws them as far as he could. The supervisor told him he had to pick them up immediately or they would escort him off the property and give him a ban. So this 80-plus-year-old man has to crawl around on his hands and feet and eventually find all three chips. He then gets up, gives the dealer enough lip that he calls the floor back over, and they kick the man out. Story 34. I work at a casino in Niagara Falls, see many people down, $1 million. A couple of nights ago, I had a guy yelling at another employee. She took his expired platinum card, which is standard procedure. He starts yelling at her to give it back, or he's calling security and having her fired. She ignores him and helps out other customers. He's in a panic mode and really wants his card back. He calms himself down a couple of minutes later and tells me he's a regular and keeps all his old cards from memories. I asked my supervisor what to do because we never give back expired cards. She pulled up his play and he's down over $2.5 million, so she gave him his card back and apologized. I learned that if you spend a lot in the casino, you're pretty much able to do whatever you want. Story 35. Not an employee, but I'm an avid gambler. About 15 years ago, a group of 5 or 6 of us decided to take a trip to a casino a little over an hour away. Instead of playing in the pit like I normally do, I decided to stay around them and just play the games they chose. We floated back and forth between blackjack, 3-card poker, which I hate more than I love my mother, and a few other games. Upon arriving, getting our first drinks, and plopping at the three-card poker table, I noticed a guy playing Caribbean stud at a table right next to us. He stuck out because he was by himself, normal-looking guy. I figured he was in his mid-50s, dressed in slacks, button up, and no tie. I didn't think much of it. I assumed he was just blowing off steam after work or something. Fast forward 10, 12 hours or so, we moved around a fair bit, had several drinks, went to eat, napped in our room, and came back down to play some more. We sat down at the same three-card poker table, and this guy still at the stud table all alone. He must have had a really bad day at work. Then it happened. I hear a grown man screaming, not the mad, angry screaming, but "my dog just passed away" kind of screaming. I snap my head around to see the same guy push over his chair, scream some gibberish, flop to the ground, and begin to flail around on the floor like a 2-year-old that just got told no. After a few awkward minutes of his sobbing tantrum, several security guards dragged him away out of sight. The stud table closed immediately and everything turned back to normal, with all of us not having a clue as to what happened. Well, 30 minutes or so later, that same stud dealer got rotated to our table to relieve the deal. I wasted 0 seconds and asked what happened. At that point, I heard the saddest poker story of my life. Without explaining everything about Caribbean Stud, it's a jackpot game. It's got a huge flashing sign with the current jackpot that continually raises. In order to play and have a chance at the jackpot, you must ante the $5 and put $1 in the slot for the jackpot. If you don't put in that $1 in the slot, you can only win up to double your ante. That's terrible odds, one of the worst odds of winning in a casino. Well, Jim Bob, as we'll call him, had been there around 15 hours and had slowly gambled nearly all the X amount of money he brought with him. The dealer wasn't sure about the amount. He guessed at least $5,000. Well, when Jim Bob went to play his last hand, he only had $5. He only had the money for the ante and couldn't and didn't put in the $1 in for the jackpot. Before the hand was dealt, the dealer said the guy even mentioned something to the effect of, "I've lost everything else I brought today. I'll be damned if I go get a $1 chip just for the jackpot, and I'm not leaving here with this $5. He got dealt a frickin' royal flush. Because he didn't enter the $1 chip, he wasn't eligible to win the jackpot. What was the jackpot, you ask? $1.33 million? As a poker player, this ripped me. If I was in his situation, I would have done the same thing every time. I'm not quitting when I've lost everything but $5, and I'm damn sure I'm not going to ask someone for $1. Also me, my tantrum in his situation would have been very similar. Story 36. Former table dealer. I've seen a lot, nothing too horrible because the casino I worked at was in a small town in the Midwest. The two people I remember most were both regulars. One was an older guy who was a real grouch but would never give up no matter how much he lost. What I remember most about him is that every time he lost a hand, he'd blow smoke in my face. He never once smiled at me and always called me a witch under his breath. I would call him out for it, but he'd still do it again the next day. Another was a player who was maybe a couple of years older than me. He was such a regular and we had so much in common that I actually became friends outside of my job, small town, Midwest problems. But he had a seriously horrible gambling fixation. He gambled so much and he was terrible at blackjack, he never even came up and was always down. And he'd go every single night. When I quit my job, he stopped going and I was thankful. I hated seeing the spiral, the defeated look when you think, just one more hand and I'll win my money back, but it never happens. Story 37. Having spent over a decade as a dealer and floor supervisor, all on the night shift, I've accumulated countless stories. I've witnessed altercations between players over losses, with one even spilling onto our craps table. My favorite high-limit craps player would often express his frustration by punching the table or spiking chips when he lost, and he'd use strong language towards other players. Despite his temper, he always liked me because I was an efficient dealer who could handle his large bets without issue. He'd often request me from other games and I'd be reassigned. I knew that no matter how much he was up, he would always give it back and then some. He was a great tipper and I enjoyed discussing sports with him, though I always knew he'd end the night infuriated. Some individuals face desperate situations related to their gambling losses, with unfortunate outcomes occurring in our parking areas. There was also a doctor who was defrauding the government to fuel his significant gambling problem. He was eventually caught, and most of us were relieved as he was generally unpleasant to the dealers. I've seen people scream at their significant others with red faces when they were losing. I also witnessed a guy punch a slot machine, cutting his hand when the glass shattered. One time, a player fainted while standing at my table after I took all his money, collapsing into a ball. He had been up thousands when I started dealing to him, but 6 hours later, he was down thousands. He was incredibly arrogant when winning, but became a panicky mess as he lost, repeatedly getting cash advances on his credit card. Another man cried as he was losing, lamenting that his wife would leave him and he didn't know what to do. Yep, he would keep returning to the tables with more money. He was an entitled, rude, and demanding white guy, maybe 35. I also recall a player who retched on the floor after losing a big all-in double down. He had 20, and I drew a 6-card 21. The other player at the game just stared at him after he got sick, then we exchanged a "what the heck" look. He simply apologized and walked away. So much wild stuff happened there, and this is just a glimpse. Story 38. A friend and I went to a casino in Washington State to play some blackjack. I was on a roll, but my friend wasn't as lucky and lost about $500. I kept making small bets, hoping he could win his money back. You could tell the dealer and pit boss weren't pleased with my success. They frowned every time I won and even seemed happy when my friend and others at the table were losing. I thought we were going to leave when my friend ran out of cash, but he decided to get a $500 cash advance. He came back to the table with renewed energy and in just a few hands won all his money back plus another $500. The shoe ended and we both looked at each other, deciding it was a good time to leave since we were both up significantly. The dealer and pit boss were visibly upset. The dealer then asked for a tip, and my friend simply told him that if he wanted any tips, he should try acting like he wanted people to win. Story 39. Having grown up with parents, aunts, and uncles who collectively spent over 40 years in the casino business, I've even had a stint dealing poker in Vegas. While I never witnessed extreme outbursts myself, though I did have a rather unusual tipping attempt involving a man offering chips he'd retrieved from an injury, my dad shared a story that has always stayed with me. My father has dealt baccarat in the high roller room at a major strip casino for nearly 30 years. He regularly encountered a particular gentleman from South America, an obscenely rich denim importer. One week, this individual came in and was losing tens of thousands at a time, eventually being down close to $1 million. He was clearly upset, not in a belligerent rage, but deeply frustrated. My dad, having dealt to him for a while, took a moment to ask, "Why do you do this if you aren't enjoying yourself?" Now, this isn't a typical question, especially with many baccarat players being quite reserved, but he asked nonetheless. The man's response was quite profound to me. "This is the only thing in my life I don't know the outcome of before it begins." It's a thought that has stuck with me. While I'd certainly welcome him losing $1 million to me or my dad to change our lives, it truly highlights a unique perspective. It sounds like a statement that could only come from someone who has experienced so much that they're perhaps bored with life, seeking an unknown outcome in a world where they can seemingly control everything else. Story 40. Not an employee, but one of my first casino trips, I was playing a video poker machine that had a minigame with a jackpot feature. A man hit a royal flush on this minigame, winning around $8,000 on a 25-cent machine. I was happy for him. It was exciting to witness. As he waited for an attendant to pay out, he started telling my friend and me that this was his third or fourth jackpot that month. We were initially impressed, thinking he must be incredibly rich and lucky. However, he then revealed that he had been about to give up, went to his car, found some loose change in the seats, and came back in to win with it. At that moment, it dawned on me that this guy wasn't lucky or rich at all. He was deeply entrenched in a cycle of gambling, constantly searching for the next big win. I felt a pang of sadness for him, realizing that after repeated losses, his go-to move was to search his car for quarters just to keep playing in a seemingly endless loop. Story 41. I was working as a cocktail waitress in a less than glamorous casino when an incident unfolded that I won't soon forget. As I was serving drinks, I noticed a man intensely hitting a slot machine. Being only 5'2" and around 115 pounds, I certainly wasn't going to approach him. Fortunately, security was called and they eventually told the man to calm down. Things seemed to settle and he appeared to have chilled out. About half an hour later, as I was making my rounds, I noticed him standing with his back against the machine. I didn't think much of it at the time. The next thing I knew, customers were reacting strongly and the area descended into chaos. It turned out the man had his back to the slot machine because he was crapping into the coin tray. He was nowhere to be found afterward and we had to call a biohazard team to clean up the mess. I was in the casino industry for a long time, and I can honestly say that was probably one of the top 5 most unsanitary things I'd ever witnessed. Story 42. Was a poker dealer for a casino for a while, not the 4-card poker stuff, Texas Hold'em against other players, a rake game. Limit was 5 out of 10, and the games are reasonably large. A well-known whale shows up and dumps 20,000 pounds on the table for the max buy-in. Over the period of maybe 3 to 4 hours, he runs it up, absolutely crushing the game, and has a stack of maybe 60, 70,000 pounds in front of him. A hand comes around when he has already invested about 1,000 pounds pre-flop, raised to 50, re-raised to 300, re-raised to 1,000, call. I don't remember the run out, but I remember he had a full house, which he got on the river. The other player raised his bet. He raises all in, and the other player snaps calls and rolls over a 4 of a kind, rinses our guy for like 60,000 pounds. And he's just sitting there, ashen-faced, then a low, guttural groan. Like the kind of groan you make when you suddenly and gradually realize that you're gonna pass away. It increased in volume until he was bellowing it out, then he just slumped in his chair, kinda slid off of it, and then walked out, visibly shaking. Never seen that before. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.